Okie dokie. Did we finally get there? I think we did. Wonder if I need the harsh light or not. Yeah, that's better. SWIN. Okay, so now I can go and share this on the socials, as is always the thing. But for those of you who are watching this after the live fact, what is up? Hope you're having a terrific Tawa Tuesday, as I like to say. But okay, mute that tab because I don't want to hear that doubling audio and such. And get over to Facebook and to the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group specifically. So I want as many of them as can potentially participate as possible. But yes, for all those trickling through, welcome, bienvenidos, as I always say. Rocking my son's gear, as you guys probably are not shocked by in any way, shape, or form. I incessantly discuss my beloved Shooty Hoops team on here. Okay, just make sure this link is in the group. Oops. That's got to be an undo. Wow, fuck that up. Yeah, I really effed that up. Jesus Crimbus. Didn't grab the link properly. I thought it did. Okay, copy. Come on, Fuego. You can do it. Put the bees on Winkler. Okay. We're losing ratings. Dead air. But who's seen Doctor Strange this weekend, huh? Anybody excited about that? I'm very curious, especially with the return of Raimi to horror. Dude hasn't really done much in a hot minute. So that excites me incessantly. Curious how many crazy cameos and such we're going to get in this sucker, because mine. Jeez, this ain't working. This ain't working, Fuego. See if anybody's actually jumping on yet. Movie Talk Plus. Patrick, what's up, man? Thank you for joining. Much appreciated. I feel like this is a little shaky for some reason. I don't know why. I'm going to move it back a little bit. Perhaps that will assist. Scott Baker, what is up, man? Jose Storms, what is going, dude? Travis Miller, just saw Spider-Man. Doctor Strange is calling me, as it should. They're definitely going multiverse craziness. And not just in the MCU, man. For anybody who has seen the recently released Everything Everywhere All at Once, I feel like multiverses in general are just like, I don't know, they're finally seeing a lot more attention in filmmaking, far beyond just comic book movies, which I think is pretty damn cool. So these are exciting times that we live in, and I cannot recommend that movie at once. It is bonkers as fuck, but incredibly entertaining. Michelle Yeoh is so good. So yes, get on that shizzle if y'all have the inclination. Then I'm just going to share it on the Twitters, and then we will be more or less good to start rock-a-lockin'. Okay, nope, I gotta condense that just a wee bit. Yeah, and I hadn't read most of these stories in like around 10 years, because I finished my 7-year journey of reading all of the Stephen King stuff like 3 or 4 years ago. So it had been a hot minute since I'd read stuff like the one where it's like you can only say it in French. I'm trying to remember the full title, but I'm going to be briefly jumping story by story once we get stuff commenced proper. And okay, so now that I have done all of the sharing, because it's caring. Okay, who else is jumping on? Yep, I saw Travis Miller. Heavy Metal Beer Club. Cheers, Fuego. You rock, brother. Hey, thank you so very much. I definitely remember us having some interaction at Mad Monster. You guys going to be back at Mad Monster this year? That would be my question. Excited for the Firestarter remake, Patrick? Yeah, man. I'm especially excited about the Firestarter remake because the director of it did a little movie called, I believe it was called The Vigil, if I remember. Yeah, and it was about this practice in Jewish culture about how when a body dies in a home, like before they can actually like get it out to, like the morgue or, the person who's going to actually prepare the corpse and stuff, they are worried about the possibility of evil spirits like causing some sort of, I don't know, residual energy It's a little more complex, than I was aware of. But yeah, so this dude played by Dave Davis, I think it was. Yeah, so he goes and he's sitting in this PG-13 movie film that actually brings scares with this corpse. Creepiness goes down. His performance is great, and so it is that director. And I need to double check the name. Yeah, Keith Thomas is the one who has directed this new Firestarter film. Originally, I was kind of on the fence about Zac Efron, but then when I was reading some statistics, and I'm like, oh wow, even though he will always be the little high school musical dude. Not that I ever watched any of those. I was a little ahead of my time, but that's what I saw him in, like, pop culture. And then I know he got into edgier stuff with what, like, the Neighbors with Seth Rogen, and he did like the Baywatch movie and whatever. But yeah, man, the cast is just stacked for this. And most notably, her name is Ryan Kira Armstrong. She was on the most recent season of American Horror Story. She kicked ass. She had a creepy arc, and she just had the brooding energy that I think will be really great for Charlie. And Michael Greyes, I believe, is the one who's playing Rainbird. So they're actually, like, casting a Native American as I mean, as much as I love George C. Scott, Patton and the third Exorcist film and whatnot, I'm just kind of like, why would you guys do that? The whitewashing is real. But yeah, it comes out on the 13th, if I'm not mistaken. So it's going to be a dual release too. So if you have a subscription to Peacock, just like what they did with the Halloween movies, I think they had that dual release, so you can go to theaters or you can just stream it at home. So hopefully it's good. Fingers firmly crossed, as I all too often say. So, okay. Travis says, I wonder where they got the multiverse idea from. Yeah, right. But, I mean, the everything everywhere all at once before, because I need to stay on target. But it definitely felt like just the aspect of creativity and how beautifully shot it is and how funny and weird. I mean, you can definitely tell that these are like comic book dudes, the Daniels, the directors of it. So, yeah, be there and ready to party. That's rad status. Okay, excellent. So I like to at least wait till we're in double digits, and I know these, like, midweek earlier streams are kind of tough, but that's been the Stephen King slot for a while, being here on Tower Tuesdays and such. So Patrick says, or Movie Talk Plus, I should specify. Don't want to give away your secret identity. But yeah, I'm also excited. Just recently watched the original, which was good. Yeah. And you know what? I even liked Rekindled, the made-for-TV sequel that had Malcolm McDowell in it. And Moreau Marguerite. Oh, God damn it. Her name is eluding me proper. I probably just butchered that. But she was in the Mighty Ducks movies. She's in the Wet Hot American Summer stuff. Total babe, very funny. And yeah, she actually gave a good performance as a grown-up Charlie. If anybody has ever heard of Firestarter 2 Rekindled, I did a review on my series Films That Forgot the Face of Their Father here on the channel covering that film. So, okay. Would you do a video on Finn? I'm having a brain fart, Jose. I've got so much everything's eventual, like, just filling up my head right now. I'm having a brain fart, unfortunately. But okay, you know what? Since there is shooty hoops to watch later, since there's all kinds of stories, 14 in all to discuss here, but I'm actually only going to be covering 13 because I have talked at length about one in particular. But let's get the show started proper and let me blow your eardrums out, shall we? Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime in Fuego, and if it please you join me here for a bit of palaver on Heyo! Aha! Yes, Stephen King. That's right, and obviously, bienvenidos and welcome to the horror show. This is a month overdue, unfortunately, because for those who, I'm not going to say you were living under a rock, but I know not everybody tunes into every live broadcast or, gets every notification or whatever the hell it may be. And longtime fans, there's a lot of stuff to watch on the internet, most notably here on the YouTubies. But we lost our channel for 16 days to some hackers, so to speak, from overseas. And so that all of the thanks to Cecil as the showrunner and the founder of the Feast here for, because it is all tied in with his personal email without getting into specifics. And so he was the one who had to navigate those waters of trying to figure out how to just get the proper information to even start the reacquisition process. And I know it was a hell of a headache for him, but he forged forward, he remained vigilant, and he got that shit done. So very happy, even though it's a month later than it was originally supposed to be. Talking for its 20th anniversary Everything's eventual. 'Tis truth. You speak true, Sai. And yeah, man, I mean, this is one that I have gone on record a few times saying it's not one of my absolute favorites as far as just the consistency of quality throughout the entire anthology. So it has 14 different tales. I believe it's 11 short stories, and then there's 3 novellas that are housed within this sucker. But there's still some very strong stuff in here. Faux show. And, some of my favorite short stories too, like The Man in the Black Suit, which is exceptional. You've got a Dark Tower story. Yeah, Little Sisters of Eluria. So of the 14 tales, since I've reviewed Little Sisters before, and I think I even did a video about the Marvel comic book adaptation as well, I am not going to burden everyone's time with that. However, I'm trying to remember where the hell I put it. Oh, there was just so many books in here. Oh, yes, it is back here. I'm not sure if I had ever actually shown off this awesomeness, but this deluxe edition of Little Sisters that was a great gift from Lady Catherine is just such a gorgeous and very, very expensive edition to track down. It's one of those where I'm honestly like scared to even read it. I'm like, this is like a cute display copy, and I'll just leave my reader out there. But this actually has both the Little Sisters of Eluria, and it has the original as well. And so you've got just some killer illustrations that I want to show them, but I'm trying to be just so ginger with all of this, But you've got some great charcoaly like pencil looking stuff, and then you've also got some cool full color illustrations. But that is not to take anything away from the Marvel adaptation, which is awesome. But the point being of me breaking this sucker out is because, yes, it's the only tale that I'm not really going to talk about, although I did reread it, and I still think it is such an underrated Dark Tower story. And I think a lot of people, between Little Sisters and also Went Through the Keyhole, I feel like some people, since those are I guess, kind of side quest sort of things, that it's not talked about as often. But if you have never been aware, it is housed in this collection. And so 14 Dark Tales, but I'm only going to be discussing the 13 of them. And, it's interesting because there are a lot of themes that King comes back to quite a few times in this, in a few different tales, most notably. So we all know that there, or maybe you didn't, but there is a series of stories narrated by Stephen King that he did called Blood and Smoke. And they even made it look like a cigarette pack, which I think is pretty dope. I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, but I did for a long time. And I know it's something that Sai King has said himself numerous times. He's like, yeah, the few vices I have not been able to give up. He's like, I quit drugs, I quit drinking, all that other stuff. But he's like, I do still have a cigarette every now and then. And so there were a few different ones on here. So there was Lunch at the Gotham Cafe, there was 1408, there was In the Death Room. And all of these have an aspect of just nicotine in the narrative, which is kind of funny. And it's usually about people who actually, all 3 of those stories, what the hell am I saying? All 3 of the stories, as I'll get into in a little more detail, are about someone who has quit smoking, and they are just faced with the temptation based on the situation that they find themselves in. And so I still have a boombox somewhere, because I still have the first 3 Dark Towers narrated by Sai King himself instead of the re-recordings. Those are only available on cassette tape, and I know cassette tapes have seen a resurgence. So this is one of my favorite little collector's items that I have. I think it's pretty cute. So those are 3 of the tales in here, and all of these were previously collected in something else, So I had everything from Ride the Bullet, which was the first ebook that was ever put out for mass market in the world. And there were lots of collections, and I know 6 Stories was one that had LT's Theory of Pets. Also has Gotham Cafe, the one that I was just mentioning. Lucky Quarter, which I did not remember at all. So that was an interesting revisit. Autopsy Room 4, Man in the Black Suit. And then also an early incarnation of Blind Willie that later was folded into none other than Hearts in Atlantis. So what are some thoughts on this anthology, guys? Do you have any particular favorites? Are there ones that stick out to you? Because, yes, I would love to hear your thoughts. Ooh, gorgeous. Lucky 13. Lou, happy belated birthday, man. I think in I have so many birthday notifications about all these different people, and I could have sworn I saw yours maybe a week or so ago, and I had meant to say something, and I'm glad that you popped in. So Feliz cumpleaños, even if it's in a belated sort of order. I hope you're doing good up there in the great white north, my friend. And yes, very, very excited to hear your thoughts on some of the ones here that you are into. But yeah, as everybody likes to say on YouTube, let's just jump right into it. In the fact that one of my favorite things about this anthology is that King gives a little blurb of insight about every single story. And I think he's done that for a few of the other anthologies. But nah, this one he does it for, besides a lengthy introduction, which is fascinating, about what is the, trying to double check, it's practicing the almost lost art. And he talks extensively about how he still loves to do short stories, even though there's a lot of people, at least at the time of this, when it was published, in March 19th, March 19th of 2002. I think he was lamenting a little bit that, it's a lost art, not just to him, but with regards to a lot of writers, because you want to write like an epic novel or a scary novel or something that combines both, like The Stand does. And so it's a really great essay at the beginning of this. And then he also has short little blurbs, sometimes before and sometimes after, depending on if he thinks the insight to the writing process is going to spoil some stuff, then he was typically putting it at the end. And so it varies story by story. But another funny bit of insight that he also says at the very beginning of this, and this just cracked me up because I'd forgotten about it because I hadn't read this book in like 10 years, So what I did was take all the spades out of a deck of cards plus a joker. Ace to king equals 1 to 13. Joker equals 14. I shuffled the cards and dealt them. The order in which they came out of the deck became the order of the stories based on their position in the list my publisher sent me. And it actually created a very nice balance between the literary stories and the all-out screamers. I also added an explanatory note before or after each story, which is what I was just mentioning, depending on which seemed the more fitting position. Next collection selected by Tarot. So he just has such a great sense of humor about him, man, that I really appreciate. And I feel like this was the time where he's finally starting to find his footing again a little bit. And that's not to say that all of the 90s output was bad, but, the initial onset of sobriety, I think, just with as hard as Homeboy was, using and yet still cranking compelling stuff out in a lot of cases, it had to have been a significant period of adjustment. And so this was definitely something nice to have on hand, like shortly after the injury, because he had been banking all of these short stories in a lot of publications like the New Yorker and Newsweek, I think, USA Today, maybe a few others. And in previous collections that were like 6 stories was signed and limited to like 1,000 copies or something. So yeah, that's not something that I am going to, drop insane amounts of money to track down. So it's great that he gave his constant readers the opportunity to actually check all of these recent stories out, because I think the earliest one goes all the way back to 95. And then, the latest was like 2000, 2001, perhaps, something like that. So yeah, it was definitely cool that he finally got around to, and also the fact that with the recuperation process still going down between the initial vehicle accident thing and then also shortly thereafter, I think it was like a year or so later, having the pneumonia scare. So then, yeah, the fact that he had a stockpile of solid stuff, as it's no Night Shift, it's not Skeleton Crew. I don't even put it on the same level as like Just After Sunset or even Bizarre Bad Dreams. This is down there with Nightmares and Dreamscapes as not being some of my favorites, but once again, there are some bangers in here. So the very first one, also, before I forget, because I always read it and then I also listen to it, so I do each of those within the course of like the whole book of the month thing that we've been doing for Hail to Stephen King on the horror show here for a while. And there's some great narration. You've got Oliver Platt doing a story. I believe it's the Autopsy Room 4. Yeah. You've got Justin Long doing the title story, Everything's Eventual, about Dinky, who shows up at the end of the Dark Tower. That Stephen King does a few stories himself, including one where he actually reads LT's Theory of Pets to, it's like a big British audience. I'm trying to remember where exactly he was. But yeah, just to hear the laughter and their interaction with him and, his pause and response. I knew I wrote it down here somewhere, but yeah, in any event, just hearing King charm a crowd as well was endearing and pretty cool. So yeah, lots of good narration. If you're into the audiobook thing, No, lots of purists are not. Got my agua here. That is none other than Tim Curry, and I'm very excited for that It documentary from Joe Campompiano that's coming out this summer. I believe it's going to be exclusively available on Screenbox. So he had previously did, I think it was Unearthed and something that, anyway, it was a Pet Cemetery documentary that's available all over the place. But yeah, covering the original 90s miniseries. I'm very excited. So water, cheers to water. The desert is getting extremely hot very quickly here right now. And I've got this service with my SRP, Salt River Project, who provides my electricity, where between the hours of 3 and 6, they'll charge you like triple the price. And then the rest of the day, they charge you winter rates. And that's for like the rest of the day and the rest of the week. So having to turn down the air conditioning, man, at the hottest point of the day between 3 and 6 here in the deadly desert. It's not fun. It's not fun. But so, okay. First and foremost, the story that begins the proceedings for the sequencing of all of this. And it's Autopsy Room 4. So this is a story about, I believe he's like a Wall Street broker stock dude, if I remember correctly, but he's out golfing. He is known as Howard the Conqueror. And everybody keeps referring to him as looking like Michael Bolton, which I thought was an amusing running joke. And he essentially becomes conscious. I don't want to even use the term wakes up, but dude becomes conscious, and he's like in an autopsy room, and he's being wheeled around, and at first he can't really see much. He can only hear things, and then his senses are slowly, very slowly starting to come back, and he's like, am I dead? Am I not dead? And he starts to, and I'm not going to really spoil any of these stories, so it is the real question of, okay, is there consciousness still in the body? Like, is the brain still alive, but his body is dead? Is there something different afoot beyond that? And so, while I've seen a few different stories like this, it was really the humorous part, I think, that King brought to it that I enjoyed the most. And this is one that did originally appear in 6 stories as well. But this is got a few passages, as I all too often do, and most of them are front loaded. Don't really have much from later in this, but just the way King describes this dude's efforts of trying to determine if he's just dead, and his brain is still, how they say that you have that activity for X amount of minutes after your body is like kaput. And so just wanted to rest on this. I concentrate everything on my chest. I push or try to, and nothing happens. A sound. I make a sound. It's mostly inside my closed mouth, but I can also hear and feel it in my nose. A low hum. Concentrating, summoning every bit of effort, I do it again. And this time the sound is a little stronger, leaking out of my nostrils like cigarette smoke. Makes me think of an old Alfred Hitchcock TV program I saw a long, long time ago, where Joseph Cotton was paralyzed in a car crash and was finally able to let them know he was still alive by crying a single tear. And if nothing else, that minuscule mosquito whine of a sound has proved to myself that I'm alive, and I'm not just a spirit lingering inside the clay effigy of my own dead body. But it does keep you guessing as to whether he is or not. And so, yes, there was an Alfred Hitchcock episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which King all too often does wear his homages and his influences on his sleeve, where he's like, yeah, this is my version of this story, just like Salem's Lot was his version of Dracula. Just like, he's done his homages countless times. And I at least appreciate the fact that, when he does it, he often admits it. And this also reminded me of a Tales from the Crypt episode about this doctor who he thinks he's dead, and he's like stuck in his body. Really great Tales from the Crypt episode too, if I remember correctly, because that's one of my favorite shows, like ever. So at the end of the day, like, the explanation and the way this story kind of rounds out and finds its resolution, I can't say I love it. I'm not going to go that far, and that's kind of the case with a lot of the stories in this collection, is that the ones that are good are really, really good. I mean, they are damn good. They are practically great. But then there's another, the major contingent of these, I think, they're fine. This one succeeds in some of the humorous aspects. So Autopsy Room 4, I will definitely give it that. This is the one, as I said, that's narrated by Oliver Platt, and he does a good job. But it just didn't, since I'd seen things like this before, It's just King's take on it, and I didn't really believe that he brought that much unique to the table. I mean, some of the pros, like I mentioned just now, about being caught in this clay effigy and all that stuff, I thought that was cool. And there is the darkly comedic aspect of how this story kind of okay. I did find some amusement in how we determine whether he's dead or not. That's the dark humor I'm mentioning, where it's funny in that regard. So I will give him that. But yeah, let's move along. Let's see if anybody has anything else to say. In the Death Room, 1408 and Autopsy Room 4 are my top picks. Jose Storm says, I was 6 or 7 when I first saw the movie adaptation of 1408, and that was my first gateway to the king of horror. Well, yeah, that's an exceptional adaptation, man, gotta say. And so the one that is right after this, second in the order, it's called The Man in the Black Suit. And this is one that's actually been adapted into a lot of dollar babies, and it was originally published in the New Yorker way back in October of 1994. So I think this might actually be the oldest story in the collection, and it takes place in like the very early 1900s. And well, the good chunk of the story does, but it is a old man who is considering himself to be near his deathbed and everything, and he's like, this story has haunted me for my entire life, so I'm going to tell it. So it's like the 1910s, and he talks very vividly, King does, about just how drastically different life was at that time. And it does take place in Castle Rock, which is cool. So you have that connection. And talking about how, there were barely any cars, obviously. He's like, there were no planes flying overhead. He's like, there was an essence of serenity that was unparalleled as I got older and saw the advancement of technology throughout the 20th century. And so he does his chores, and this kid's like, I'm going to go down to the fishing pond. And his dad's like, okay, go. And so there is a little backstory as well about the fact that his older brother had died from a bee sting, because it plays very heavily into this kid falling asleep with his rod in the stream or the pond or whatever, and then awakening to this just frightening dude, but yet dressed like so pristinely. He's in like he's got nicely polished shoes, and he's in this black suit, and he's looking very sharp. But it's when you look him in the face and you see his teeth and you see the fire embers burning in his eyes, and it's very vivid description on King's part. And the fact that this dude just strikes up very casual conversation with the kid, but then it starts to get very horrific and it's very scary. And I've seen some of the dollar babies, and they're okay. This is definitely one that I mean, could it be expanded into a full feature film? That's what I'm not honestly 100% about. Although I do prefer when short stories by not just King, but any author are expanded into features, as opposed to taking a lengthy novel and trying to trim fat and cut things out and stuff, because all too often in those instances you end up alienating the lovers of the source material, because they're like, oh, you took that out, what the hell, and so they get upset. But this might be my favorite in the collection. It definitely rivals 1408, and I really like Everything's Eventual too, but we will get to those in due time. So yeah, the fact that once again the dude is writing down his story finally as he's getting close to death, because of the fact that he was a writer at the Castle Rock Call. I mentioned the vivid description, and also the bee aspect, where it's like a bee, a special bee, a devil bee, and it deals with allergic reaction to the fact that his brother died from a bee sting, and the kid has one land on his nose, and he is scared to death that if he gets stung, like, he could die. And that's where the arrival of the man in the black suit shows up. And as I said, the situation escalates, and this guy knows a lot of stuff that he has no business knowing. And so the kid's like, I've seen some people argue Randall Flagg. Sure, maybe, but it's not always, when you encounter an evil character, Randall Flagg specifically. And King said straight up, now this kid encounters the devil. So I know people have often been like, he who walks behind the rose, that's got to be Randall Flagg, and the man in black suit's Randall Flagg. It's like, no, not everybody. He's taken on a lot of guises, but they're not all going to be Randall Flagg. Although, unless King had said Satan, I would have probably thought, I mean, the Covenant Man, that's presumably, Randall Flagg as well. But there is a passage from this that I wanted to read, and it's from page 53. Are we well met? Yeah, the fact that that's what the That's what our presumed Satan says to him. And dude proceeds with just the initial description. That's what it was that I wanted to make note of. A man was standing above me at the edge of the trees. His face was very long and pale. His black hair was combed tight against his skull and parted with rigorous care on the left side of his narrowed head. He was very tall. He was wearing a black three-piece suit, and I knew right away he was not a human being because his eyes were the orangey red of flames in a wood stove. I don't just mean the irises, because he had no irises and no pupils, and certainly no whites. His eyes were completely orange, an orange that shifted and flickered. It's really too late not to say exactly what I mean, isn't it? He was on fire inside, and his eyes were like the little isinglass portholes that you sometimes see in stove doors. And he goes on to have a lot of really intriguing just description about him, and just how the whole situation pans out. And it's creepy, and I love it. Might be my favorite in the collection. So that Jordan Clark, you see what I'm rocking right there. This shirt's really silly. It's like this skeleton. Let me just show it properly. It's like a crazy skeleton monster slam dunking a basket on a cactus. Hey, I love him, but I'm here to talk to the king. So then we jump into the third story, and this is another one that has been adapted into a ton of different dollar babies. I just saw one at a film festival last year where it was another take on it. Was it the Stephen King Rules Film Festival, Lou? If you're still here, I can't remember if that's where I saw the newest version of this, but I have always found this story to be so friggin' strange, man. And all that you love will be carried away. So it's about this guy who's been a traveling salesman for quite some time, and he seems, from what he mentions, that he has like a lovely family at home, and yet they don't go into extensive detail about why he wants to kill himself, but I don't know if he's just worn out from the road or whatever, but yeah, he's definitely at his wit's end. He's depressed, and he no longer wants to be here anymore. He's kind of given up hope, and he's just all those years on the road and the drudgery that it seems to have worn pretty significantly upon him. And he checks into one of these seedy motels, and it talks about what the life of a traveling salesman just must be like. I mean, I know it's probably nowhere near as fun as like being in a band, obviously, because you have the camaraderie of the other people that you're playing music with, performing art with, whatever it may be. But the solidarity of that sort of life, I mean, truck drivers, I mean, there's some people who they make good money doing it. Most of them do. What am I saying? And they love it, and or they're just okay with it, or the means justify the end, or whatever you're going to say. But so he's checked into this motel, and he's ready to, pop it off. But then he starts reading this weird notebook that he's been keeping for years. And this is where I'm just like, I know people ask Stephen King, like, where the hell do you get your ideas? And it's like the most over-asked question for him. And so this guy has been keeping a book of the weirdest, grossest shit that you would see in these like nasty truck stop bathrooms, where I would imagine all sorts of sordid deeds have gone down. Not going to get into any specifics, but everything from road stop hookers to glory holes to who the hell knows, man. But there is also all too often scrolling of these strange, vulgar phrases. And this is where King's kind of juvenile potty humor comes out in just some of the sayings that are in this dude's book. They are just too much. And this guy has been keeping a log of all of his favorites. So he's using the bathroom at these nasty spots, and he's reading all of the weird sayings scrolled on the walls in the stalls and whatnot. And I just think of Dumb and Dumber and the whole kick his ass, Seabass. And then when Seabass finally tracks down Lloyd, and anyway, so he starts reading all of these, and then he starts thinking, oh God, I have to dispose of this, because when they find me, they're going to think I was a sicko and a weirdo, and I don't want bad press for my family, and have, stuff like, luckily he didn't kill them. He was a psychopath, like that sort of bit. And they leave it very vague at the end. I guess this is one of the few stories I've kind of gone through most of it. So apologies for any spoilers. I do love the ambiguity of the ending. I really do. And there's also a line in this that is one of my personal favorites. And this was published originally in the New Yorker, January 29, 2001. But this is a line that I think I've even put on like Twitter and, different Facebook groups before. explanation renders the exotic mundane. King still is very capable, and still continues to prove himself very capable of just eloquent prose, and I truly appreciate the hell out of that. Okay, yep, it was part of the that's right, definitely weird, yeah, and I've seen various adaptations of it, and it's always weird. It's always weird, just like Mute is always a really weird one, but and so the next one I'm just going to graze over very, very briefly, and that's because, I've gone on record a few times. Sorry, I'm just checking the name of this person if I'm remembering them correctly. So, I've never really been like super super into mobster stuff and the true criminess. I've warmed up to it by reading it through Sai King, but even as far as film goes and things of that nature, I mean I love the Untouchables, I guess, but it's not like one of my absolute favorite that subgenres of storytelling. And the next one, The Death of Jack Hamilton, which was also originally published in the New Yorker. This one was December 24th and 31st of 2001. Yeah, so Jack Hamilton was a member of John Dillinger's gang, and they were running all over, like, Chi-Town and St. Louis and that area of like the Midwest, and up into that area, and they were robbing banks and doing craziness. And so I'm moderately familiar with Dillinger, but it's nothing that I've read extensively about. But King went on note in the forward stuff for this one, or maybe it was afterward, I don't know, in his blurb about this that's housed in the book, and he was like, I have always loved the like period and the crazy gangsters that were going around and doing their thing. And so Jack Hamilton was a member of John Dillinger's first gang, but I'm trying to remember if his name is Homer Van Meter. So it's from his perspective. So he's another member of the gang. But so in the midst of this shootout, Jack Hamilton gets injured, and they have to they escape. The Dillinger gang escapes, but they go to a few different places after this dude is wounded, being Jack Hamilton. They're trying to save him. So they lay low at this bar that also has rooms. Then they go out to this other house, or they try to get dude patched up, but he's already like, it's infected, the gangrenousness and what have you. And yet the whole point of the story is King kind of imagining a really silly situation about how what's his face, Dillinger got his scar. I think it was like his lip or like his cheek or something like that. And the way King goes about it is more of King and his silliness and kind of weirdness. I mean, they're trying to cheer up dude who's dying, and the Homer dude is like, he's like catching flies. It was something he learned to do when he was in prison. And then there's another bit where I think Dillinger, if I remember, he's like walking around on his hands. So they're trying to, their friend is obviously getting delirious and he's dying, and they're trying to cheer him up. And there is a silly little accident that happens. And that's how, at least in King's, imaginary, his level of the tower for this particular story, it's how he got it. So I don't know. I'm not so into the subject matter. I know King is, but for that reason, it's art is subjective, as I constantly contend. So The Death of Jack Hamilton, not really so much for me. And that's where even the one that comes right after that, In the Death Room, this is another one that's dealing with like, I will always prefer when King goes like really, really sweet and down to earth storytelling, or when King goes like pretty hard supernatural. That's just my favorite tales of his. These sort of things, and like in this story, just to not get too crazy into it, but there's this reporter, and his sister had been killed or gone missing. I can't remember which specific, but something very bad happened to her. And so he's down in somewhere in South America. Even though I reread this the other day, I don't even recall if they specify exactly where he was, because at first I was thinking Mexico, but then with some of the other drug stuff that they were mentioning. But bottom line, he is in the death room, so to speak, and he's being tortured. And yet this also has some darkly comedic aspects to it. And this is one of the Blood and Smoke entries. So King actually reads this one himself. And so there's this guy he keeps referring to as Escobar, but then there's also another torturer he refers to as the Bride of Frankenstein, which made me laugh. It's this old, like really tough, mean woman, and a man horse. Oh my goodness. So they're trying to get some information out of him, and about this other confidant of his and how he's down there investigating. And so these really ill people down there have him in their custody, and the torturing is about to begin. And the guy who's brought in to start torturing him proceeds to say, excuse me, a man whose shit has been electrified never forgets it. So they're about to start doing some zapping, some electrical torture in this particular story. And as I mentioned, it was along within the death room, along with 1408 and lunch at the Gotham Cafe. So King describes it as a stainless steel dildo for pygmies that this guy is going to presumably jam up homie's keister and start a zapping. And the entire time, the Escobar character is like trying to get dude to smoke a cigarette. He's like, "You want a cigarette?" And he's like, "No, I quit. I'm not going to." And so this is another one of those stories because all of the blood and smokes were about the crux of these people who have quit, and they're being presented nicotine in like a very, very shitty situation. And he even describes a cigarette when he's finally about to light one up as a tube of singular delight. And yeah, as somebody who smoked cigarettes for quite a while, I can see from King's perspective, like the fact that the allure remains. Like there's a line that, I think it's in the 1408 movie because I just reread the short and I don't think it's in there, but it's like a smoker's a smoker when the chips are down, like that sort of thing. It's like, if you were about to die and you knew it and you were a smoker at one point in time, you're just like, well, you need to smoke, you're like, how else am I gonna, smoke or a drink or something like that? But yeah, it does veer into some silliness for sure. And that was, once again, the silliness, just like with the Autopsy Room 4, that was because I've seen stories like this of reporters, getting tortured and then trying to make their escape. And it's kind of interesting how he goes about it, albeit a little bit predictably. But yeah, it is some of those darkly comedic aspects in the way King describes the situation at times that I think are the redeeming qualities of this story, because it's another one that I think is kind of middle of the road as far as being that original. The language is good from a prose standpoint, but it's just, once again, it's a personal taste thing with this story. Not so much about what I would gravitate towards, but there is 134. There is another bit from this one that I wanted to check out. Where are you at? 134? Or did I already take it out? Okay, yeah, and this is where he's about to try to make his escape, and he's finally gonna smoke that cig. And he's like, he put the cigarette between his lips. Escobar leaned further forward and snapped back the cover of his gold-plated lighter. He flicked the wheel. The lighter produced a flame. Fletcher was aware of Hines' infernal machine humming like an old radio, the kind with tubes in the back. He was aware of the woman he had come to think of without a trace of humor as the bride of Frankenstein, looking at him the way the coyote in the cartoons looked at the Roadrunner. He was aware of his heart beating, of the remembered circular feel of the cigarette in his mouth, a tube of singular delight. Some playwright or other had called it, and of the beat of his heart incredibly slow. Last month, he'd been called upon to make an after-luncheon speech at the Club International where all the foreign press geeks hung out, and his heart had beat faster then. So he's surprised at how calm and cool and collected he is, despite the fact that he's staring down death in this situation. So Fletcher's an interesting character. I think that if this is more of your like subgenre of like thriller sort of storytelling, evil drug lords and Snoopy reporters and all that different stuff, you may be a little bit more into it. But once again, not one of my personal favorites. But now as we get to kind of the middle of the proceedings here, we got to talk about something that ties to the tower. Everything's eventual. Weird story. Another one with a lot of like goofy humor at times because it's written from the perspective of a 19-year-old. Haha. Surprise. Surprise. 19. But I love how darkly comedic this story is. And just the perspective of Dinky Earnshaw, our lead character, who is just a pissed off 19-year-old high school dropout. He's working at a grocery store, pushing carts, and then he's delivering pizzas. And so he's not happy with his lot in life. But then he gets a call from this mysterious man who is aware of an ability that he has. And this is where I'm going to have to dance around a little bit because it is one of the lengthier stories. It's the one narrated by Justin Long. And, the fact that it ties in with the tower, I don't even know if I want to really spoil that too much, because an ability that Dinky has, I guess you would describe it as a push. It's something he's been aware of since he was very, very young. Most notably, it was something that he remembers about a dog that was like terrorizing his neighborhood when he was growing up. And so Dinky is recruited by this organization called Transcorp, if I remember correctly. And it's because he has this ability to push and make people disappear, die essentially. And so he is recruited by this mysterious corporation, and just the mundane nature in which he describes his life since getting recruited, and the fact that he gets just a weekly allowance of $70, but he is provided with a home to live in, but he is not really encouraged to interact with much of any people. He talks to his mother every now and again, but yeah, I mean, his best buddy, he's not allowed to talk to him, Pug or Bug or whatever. I'm trying to remember his name, but yeah, he is being employed in this home to do that push and to take out certain people of prominence that he is at least explained in the recruiting process are evil, and so they're doing the Lord's work. They're doing righteous stuff. They're taking bad people off the face of the earth. But it's when Dinky starts to kind of realize, well, maybe that's not entirely true. The writing is on the wall in that regard, and so he's just wrestling with the idea of, what do I do? How do I go about it? And there's also there's a couple interesting passages here about just creativity in general, because as Dinky is being recruited, the guy is trying to explain how special he really is. And then, if it's right, you just know, it just sits there in your head and hums. And King uses this to talk about the creative process a number of different times, most notably in the original Sharpton meeting 224, I think it is. And obviously, once again, guys, please chime in if you have any thoughts on any of these stories, because we're about 2/3 of the way through at this particular point. But okay, there are two kinds of scared. At least that's my theory. There's TV scared and there's real scared. I think we go through most of our lives only getting TV scared, like when we're waiting for our blood test to come back from the doctor, or when we're walking home from the library in the dark and thinking about bad guys in the bushes. We don't get real scared about shit like that, because we know in our heart of hearts that the blood test will come back clean, hopefully, and there won't be any bad guys in the bushes. Why? Because stuff like that only happens to the people on TV. So the naivety of him being this 19-year-old kid, but yet I do appreciate the assessment, because he does go on to talk about, he's like, yo, I was real life scared in that particular instance. And then one of those noteworthy bits about just King musing on creativity in general, which I find very interesting here, is that so the dude who is recruiting Dinky, he goes on record to say, okay, there it is. Creativity is like a hand at the end of your arm, but a hand has many fingers, doesn't it? Well, at least 5. Think of those fingers as abilities. A creative person may write, paint, sculpt, or think up math formulae. He or she might dance or sing or play a musical instrument. Those are the fingers. But creativity is the hand that gives them life. And just as all hands are basically the same, form follows function, all creative people are the same once you get down to the place where the fingers join. And so just some of that stuff, I mean, King just, he veers a lot of the time when definitely not really expecting him to, so do appreciate it. Okay, so I see a new face in there. The Generic Geek just got this book last weekend. Haven't read any of the stories yet. It's a lot of mid-tier as far as me goes. Art is subjective, as I always say. As far as quality goes, I feel like a lot of them are just born mediocre, middle of the road, but there is some really, really great stuff in here. And I definitely encourage anybody who has any psychic inclinations and enjoys short stories to go and check her out. All right, what's Lou saying? Eventual is okay. Feel sorry. Feel the story is hampered because Dinky is at arm's length from the results of his work. I can see that, and the fact that it does, it goes into a little bit of detail, I suppose, as he's like investigating a little bit, but I don't know. It does appeal in some ways to, I don't know, some of the silliness of my youth and the way I had looked at things and my mentality in some cases. So yeah, that is one of my more favorites. And I do like the return of a certain character from this that is alongside another certain character from another Psy King book. So I'm trying to dance around those eggshells and not spoil anything further. So, okay. So next one, yeah, Pug, that was his buddy. Next one is the one that King actually did read in front of this big audience at the Royal Festival Hall in London back in 2001. And so first I read it on paper and I was just like, yeah, I still don't really like this one very much. But hearing King actually read it, especially before an audience, and pauses for laughter and the audience actually laughing, and just his inflection. And it's always so interesting where when you're reading it on the printed page in comparison with hearing the actual author who put those words together read it themselves. And so that's where the story, I still can't say I like LT's theory of pets that much, but it is the first in a series here, right? So we have the theme of smoking showing up in those number of stories. This is one that explores, well, it explores the dynamic of pets, I suppose, and cats versus dogs and loyalty and whatever. But it's really more so than anything about just friction in a marriage. And this is one of, I think, 3 different stories that actually take a peek at that. And so there's this dude, LT, and he has this buddy who is actually recanting the story throughout the predominance of it. And his wife leaves him. And it's in the 3 years of their marriage building up to her actually deciding to peace out. He talks about the fact that she buys him a dog named Frank, I believe. And then he buys her a cat by the name of, it's a Siamese cat. So who is called Lucy, but it gets the name Screw Lucy. And that's because even though they bought these pets for each other, the pets like switch affiliations, and they like the intended owner is not the one that said pet likes. So the dog is supposed to be for LT, and yet the dog likes Lullabelle, his wife. And and then the cat who was intended for his wife, Screw Lucy, she actually likes LT. So it's the weird like cross pollination sort of thing. And it also shows that you can never really predict who a pet is going to be loyal to in that regard. And this is one that I did have one line in particular, and it's about marital arguments, and it's about like picking and choosing your battles in that regard. But yeah, it is an exploration about how marriages can fracture, and and how pets, when you're trying to get pets, especially to like improve a situation. Not to get super musical real quick, but the format from here in Phoenix, we're one of my favorite alternative bands in like the mid-ish aughts or whatever. They were hometown heroes, and they saw some success at a national, and their singer went on to be in a different band and sing that We Are Young and all that. But anyway, they had an album, the format did, called Dog Problems, and it was about how the lead singer, Nate Roos, I think his name is. He was in a few different relationships where when stuff started to go sour, they would buy a pet. Because if they had a pet to take care of together, it was gonna like maybe bond them or something. It's like, okay, let's not have a kid together and hope the relationship's gonna work out. Let's just get a dog, And so I have known people to do that. I was in a relationship for a bit where, granted, we lasted a lot longer than just the dog, but still did not save things, unfortunately. But so that commentary is intriguing, and this particular line is where so LT was just at his friend's home for dinner, and his friend's wife does not like LT. LT's wife had disappeared and was gone, and I'm not going to give any additional specifics, but this little like just discourse I found interesting. So they're kind of bickering, and he's back, and he starts thinking to himself, I kept quiet. It was late. I was tired. It had been a hard day, a harder evening, and I was tired. The last thing I wanted was to have an argument with my wife when I was tired and she was worried. That's the sort of argument where one of you ends up spending the night on the couch. And the only way to stop an argument like that is to be quiet. In a marriage, words are like rain, and the land of a marriage is filled with dry washes and arroyos that can become raging rivers in almost the wink of an eye. Therapists believe in talk, but most of them are either divorced or queer. Oh boy, Steve King. It's silence that is marriage's best friend. Silence. And I guess, having been in a long-term relationship now for these last 3 years, sometimes it's about like picking and choosing your battles. And that's the case with a lot of relationships, whether, just cohabitation partners, actual marriage, whatever it may be. And I think that King, with all these years with Tabby, he has most definitely, like in a few stories in here in particular, like, and he has continued to over the years and even in years past, like, he reflects on being with somebody for a really, really long period of time, and how it's a war of wills, and he always gives interesting insight into that sort of process, which I appreciate, and this story was of no exception. Okay, I saw Sharon's in here at work, catching when I can. Long days and pleasant nights to all. Thank you for stopping in. The timing is tough, so significantly appreciated. And okay, so now we are veering once again into a few that I'm a little less about, and we have been going for almost an hour now. So I guess that is proper timing because there is still one really exceptional, two really exceptional ones in particular. One that I'd forgotten about too. So the road virus heads north. And so this one was actually adapted into a 2006 episode of the Nightmares and Dreamscapes television show. And I know that I'm trying to remember if In the Death Room was as well, because I think, yes, in the Death Room was also safe sex with the dead, stroking back to life. Jesus Christ. Psy King, I swear. But that is not the road virus heads north. So this is the second from this collection that was adapted. And the episode starred Tom Berenger, actually, Sniper, and, tons of other movies. But so he is an artist who lives in Derry. Excuse me, a writer lives in Derry, horror writer. So it's another instance of King doing kind of a familiar story, and in my estimation, kind of reaching back and borrowing from some of his other ideas and from some more familiar ideas that I've seen from like other authors and other TV shows and whatever. And so The Road Virus Heads North is about this author, and he is heading back up north from Boston, and he stops off at this little, like, I don't know, rummage shop or, antique store, whatever the hell you would call it. And he finds this crazy painting. And the crazy painting is of this dude in an old school muscle truck. And he is driving over this bridge, and he looks sinister as all hell. Like, he's got like almost shaved down teeth. And so he looks like some sort of cannibalistic crazoid. And so he buys this painting, and he shows it to his aunt because his aunt is on the way as he's driving back up to Derry. And when he shows it to her, she's like, nope, that shit is evil. I do not want to even continue gazing at it. Put it back in your trunk. And not just that, get rid of it. Like, she implores him. She's like, throw it in the river or something, or, just destroy it, because she just got bad vibes from it. And he just kind of doesn't think anything of it until over the course of the journey back to Derry, he looks at the painting and excuse me, geez. When you're talking for like an hour straight, and then it starts to strain the voice. But so he starts looking at the painting, and the painting is changing. And so not only does the arm of the guy in the muscle car turn and you see like a tattoo suddenly, but you can tell that, like, first the bridge disappears, and then just the locale of where dude is driving the vehicle in the painting is changing. And it's implying that this weird thing in a painting is actually following him, because it's like the place as the paint is changing where you see that the car is at now with this dude in it. He's like, oh shit, I was just there like, hour or so ago. So it gives the implication to him psychologically that there's something supernatural afoot and he is being followed. And so it's okay. The adaptation is okay. This is another one that I'm like, okay, King, you're kind of back to the well, at least a wee bit. I mean, it's kind of like a mashup of Rose Madder and maybe Christine to a degree or something. But I don't know. I do like the ending and some of the ambiguity about that one too, without getting into some spoilery sort of stuff. But this is one that just felt a bit too familiar for my personal taste. And so for that reason, I was just like, I mean, there's stories that I liked less in this particular collection than The Road Virus Heads North, but it was originally appeared in a collection called 999, and so that was where it first originated, and then here in 2006, or excuse me, in 2002 for the collection. But okay, so as we're lightning rounding through the last few of these, boy, I feel like I'm just beating a red-headed dead horse with the fact that this next one, Lunch at the Gotham Cafe, this is another one of those about quarreling in a marriage and the explorations of like the strife and the friction. And this is another one where it's like just a very strange, like non-supernaturally sort of thriller occurrence. And so this is in a lot of similarity to LT's Theory of Pets. This one has a couple that are getting divorced. Wife Diane, I think her name is, decides to randomly leave her husband. And so this is another one of the smoking stories too. So this is the one that actually does the smoking thing and the marriage crossover discussion sort of bit. And so his wife leaves him, and she's like, I'm going to send you divorce papers, blah, blah, blah. And so he decides to quit smoking after a number of years because of, he's just distressed, and he knows he's going to overdo it and just chain smoke like a maniac as he's trying to deal with all of this stress and this sadness and such. And so they make this date for presumably signing divorce papers. His wife, soon to be former wife's lawyer, is going to be there. His lawyer was supposed to be there, but has an obligation and can't show up last minute. And so they get there, and it's contentious, to be fair. And his soon-to-be ex-wife's lawyer is trying to calm the situation and keep it like slightly civil. But then this crazy worker there, one of the servers, I forget the specific French name for what he is doing, but he starts acting very erratically, and then some violence goes down. And if you've seen the actual dust jacket of this before for the first edition, it's from this story that you get that cover. So without getting into any specifics about who dies, who doesn't, anything of that nature, but yeah, and there's something about imaginary dog barking, and our lead character is theorizing near the end of the story about, what could have pushed this crazy server at this high-end restaurant over the edge. So I don't know. I was in the service industry for a number of years, and I've seen people go kind of wacko and stuff, but this is another one that just, I have long wanted to see this short film version that they made of it. And I know it had King himself in it. It had Mick Garris in it. Like, I really just want to look really quickly at that, because it's not available anywhere. And I have scoured the interwebs. And this was another one that was around for a while. It was originally in an anthology called Dark Love from 1995. Then it was collected again in 6 stories in 1997, and it was also in the Blood and Smoke. Like, this shit's been all over the place. But just to say, okay, the adaptation adapted into a short film entitled Gotham's Cafe in 2005, directed by Jack Edward Sawyers. It starred Cheney Clay, don't know, Julie Sands, Colin Douglas, a bunch of names I don't know, but so cameos from Mick Garris, Cy King's buddy, and then Steve King himself. And then Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak co-produced the film and also made a cameo. So I would imagine if that was the case, they probably had some money behind it. And I'm assuming there's rights issues that have hampered this from even really seeing the light of day, which is kind of a bummer, because I would really, even if I'm not super hot on this short story, and just like more couple bickering and stuff, I'm like, God, we just kind of had this in the pet story. And, I don't know, too many similarities in that regard. But I see a new face in there. Bobby says, first short story I read, remember the one with the devil stuck out most for me. Oh yeah, Man in the Black Suit, dude. I discussed it earlier in the proceedings because I've been going through the weird order that King found from shuffling cards and dealing and whatnot. But yeah, as far as Lunch at the Gotham Cafe, this was a few in a row in the middle of the book where I was just like, oh man, this is dragon. This is How to Train Your Dragon for me, man. But then we get to a story that I'd forgotten completely. I remembered the title because I thought it was strange, and I remembered it being about deja vu, but I really didn't remember much of anything about that feeling you can only say what it is in French. And this was originally published in the New Yorker, June 22nd, 1998. And this is one about a couple that are celebrating, another one about a couple. But this one isn't as darkly argumentative or anything, though. This one is about a couple that's been together for 25 years. And so this is obviously King once again reflecting on his journey with Tabby. And there's a lot of him in there, and the fact that she's remembering as they're going on this trip to celebrate their anniversary. So they're in this plane, and then, they're driving, and they're down in Florida. And she's remembering aspects about when they were really young. She pissed off her whole family, and she was like denounced and, whatnot, because he wasn't the right kind of Catholic, and she was raised very hardcore Catholic. But the fact that they were so poor when they first met, and he was busting his ass trying to get into IT. Obviously, this parallels what Steve was trying to, break into writing and work in janitorial stuff. And so just the early struggles of their marriage and how they eventually found it. This couple, however, did not have like 3 kids, like Steve and Tabby did. And so there's talk of a miscarriage at one particular point, but really without getting into spoilers with regards to this story, this is a trippy, strange, sad one. And the French word being referred to as déjà vu, in the fact that our lead lady keeps having déjà vu throughout the entire story, and she's waking up from these dreams. And this is where I can't divulge anything more because, and King unfortunately does, I think it's in the afterword though. I'm not even going to double check, but it's a topic that, with how I was raised religiously, really spoke out to me significantly, and I found it to be quite scary. And I really dug this one. I didn't remember anything about what it was about, so that's actually when you're 10 years aside from something and it didn't like super stick out to you then, or it was just lost to the sands of time because it was just a short little story and it had been so long since I read it, like as I mentioned, around the decade. So excuse me, yeah. But it's one of my favorites from this collection. I really dig it, and it could be adapted. I don't know if they've done a Dollar Baby for it or not, but it's been a while since I've even looked at that list because Sai King has one on his website that's constantly updated, and it's mostly short stories because all the big ones are tied up with larger studios and have been optioned by somebody else already. But so that is a solid one that I had forgotten about. And then we come to 1408. I think in some ways, possibly, unless you're a Tower junkie, this is probably the most well-known of this. And that's because of the fact that, it was made into a really killer adaptation. I think this is one of the better Sai King adaptations out there. It really genuinely is. John Cusack and Samuel Jackson, man. And yeah, but I'm not talking about the movie because the movie is quite a bit different in some ways. But this is one about a dude who goes into these alleged haunted places, if you're not familiar with the concept, and he attempts to debunk them, so to speak. And so he stayed in like Transylvanian castles and he's, weird graveyards and stuff like that. And he's written 3 books about it up until that point. And then he's interacting initially at the beginning of the tale with Mr. Owen, if I remember his name. And he's just essentially warning him, do not go and stay in room 1408. Don't do it. And he goes through an extensive amount of discussion about things that have happened in that room, how that people have hung themselves and, jumped to their deaths from, the window up there. There's also been tons of natural deaths and how, some of the workers have gone in there because despite all of these decades and decades of stories about it, yeah, he wants to like just go in there once a month, have people change the sheets and dust a little bit and whatnot. But he only is willing to send them in for these very brief periods because this woman, one of the maids, briefly lost her sight. And I mean, so he gives him every sort of example possible. And our lead dude is like, nope, you're full of shit. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to prove you wrong. You're just, trying to scare me, trying to mess with me. And he goes in there and, well, Steve King gets to do another haunted room tale. And yes, comparisons to The Shining are evident and obvious in that particular regard. But I don't know. He makes this one from the stance of debunking, I think. It really adds a uniqueness to this story. And it does feel, I've been critical of King recycling ideas a few times, most notably even in this broadcast. But I do feel like it's uniquely put together, especially from where so this was originally an audiobook, as I said. First appearance ever was in Blood and Smoke. And it works, I think, even better as an audiobook than it does just reading the page because of the fact that there is so much of this character walking around and talking into a tape recorder, throughout the entirety of the story, especially as he gets to the room and starts seeing trippy shit, like doors being uneven and seeing menus change languages and all kinds of different just weird things and he starts getting tripped out and he starts wondering really what's happening. And so King also reading it by himself for this, I thought was incredibly effective. And I mean, El Rey even went on to say that he feels like the story, because he obviously wrote it first and then read it. And he's like, after I read it and I listened back to it, I found it to be even more effective. So this is one where he does recommend, and without spoiling, because there's a lot of expansion in the film. And I know there's also like a few alternate endings to the film. Some people didn't like the theatrical one. Some people prefer it compared to some of the alternates. So I recommend both the short story and the film. But yeah, 1408 is the shit, whether you're watching the movie or the short. But if you've only seen the film, go and see the origins and do a little compare and contrast. And I just love the line where dude's like, I'm the one in charge of bullshit around here. He's like, I'm not going to be messed with. You're not going to, pull the wool over my eyes and trick me and mess with me. Yeah, 9 years without a cigarette in this, but he always carries one around. His brother had died of cancer. And so there is also your smoking angle, as I mentioned, and a description also of the presence in this room that I found very fascinating is at one point, he says, ghosts were once human. What's in there wasn't. So there's also kind of a Deadlights sort of bit as well, where another character who's staying a few rooms down from him is like looking in, and he's like entranced by this light that feels like, you know what I'm referring to, fans of It and Pennywise and such. So we're getting close. There's only 2 more, everybody. So if you have any other comments to throw in, Bev wrote the script for Gotham Cafe. That's interesting, man. I wish I could track down a copy of it, Lou. I don't know. That would be really sweet, because now that I hear you mention it, I do recall reading that or hearing him talk about it in an interview at some particular point. But King also uses an excerpt of 1408 and On Writing to show an example of his editing process. Yeah, I was going to mention that, and I just totally forgot to, because he did like a few pages of it, right, just to show how the process of updates and so on and so forth. And then also even like the fact that In the Death Room was originally published here, in Secret Windows, the companion piece to On Writing. But so now we get to the second to last, which is another one that was adapted into a feature film, directed by Mick Garris, long-term collaborator of Cy King's, and it's called Riding the Bullets. And Riding the Bullet is about this kid who is up at the University of Maine, and he finds out that his mother has had a stroke, and he's trying to hitchhike to get back and see her because his car is broken down. And it's really about this kind of creepy adventure of him riding with a weird old man at one particular point. And then he's walking through a graveyard, and he sees the headstone of this guy. And the person who proceeds to pick him up after he sees said headstone may or may not be, presumably is though, since I'm not trying to spoil, the dude who was dead in 1998. And so that's actually one thing that, since I hadn't reread this in a while, and this is another really cool deluxe. So this is a slipcase from, I'm trying to remember the publisher. This is from Lonely Road Books, but so half of it is the short story, Riding the Bullet, which actually began, as I mentioned, maybe before the proceedings began proper. This actually started out in, I believe, 2000. I should double check my notes. But I know it was the first, March 14th, 2000. So it was released for $250 as the world's first mass market ebook. And I know that was something that turned a lot of people off. Like I was reading some excerpts from a few different critics. It was the Times or the New Yorker or something. Anyway, it was a prestigious critic who was hating on the format and using that to downplay quality of story. I don't think that's particularly fair. But so this slipcase from Lonely Road has a short story, but then you do the flip to dip, and you also have Mick Garris' screenplay. And I believe there's some illustrations in this, if I recall. Trying to remember. No, there's set photos. There's so here he is in the graveyard, falls and hits his head. And so this is another one that, I will say, it's kind of creepy with presumably undead dude picking him up and, backwards cap, sleeveless shirts. As I'm wearing a sleeveless shirt, you suck, Fuego. But just the strange interactions between the two of them. Interesting thing that Mick Garris decided to do with that film adaptation that starred David Arquette was that he changed the setting from when that was published in 2000, it was like then present day, but he changed for the film back to when King was growing up in the 60s. And so it gives it a little bit of its own spin, a little bit of its own flavor. But this is another one that, well, I think I hate to say it's fine, but it's, once again, it's more, I guess, saying middle of the road once again for this one. as far as scares, as far as predictability. Although from like a heart standpoint, this is most definitely King remembering his own mother, and the fact that, and he talks at length about just our lead character's mom in writing the bullet, just all the ass that she busted with working these long shifts and just making sure he got to college, and yet also with a lot of the same health problems that King's own mother had. And so, being a single mom and no husband around, and just the extent of work that had to be done, those are the points in this story where it shines. It doesn't shine as much for me with the scares or with the kind of predictability of the choice that our lead is presented with, by the dude who's driving him around. So it's definitely not bad. It's once again one of the more middle of the road ones here. And while I enjoy it for what it is, it's definitely not of the top tier in this short story series, or at least for me in a lot of King's later anthological work. So, well, we are right here at the very end. No, me too. Haven't seen it either. Bullet is pretty good. The movie, not so much. Yeah, the movie has big time Christine vibes for sure. King recycling. Yeah, it's a topic that comes up all too often, regrettably. But so we're at the end. We're at the finale, and another one that I completely had forgotten about. It's where was it previously put together? I'm trying to recall. I believe this one was in USA Today, if I remember. But it's a cute little story, actually. Not really much supernaturalness at all. In USA Weekend, July 30th, and it's June 30th and July 2nd, 1995 issue. And it also appeared in 6 stories, and then was later collected here. But Lucky Quarter. So this is one about a woman who works, and I believe she's somewhere in Nevada, if I remember correctly. That's because of the gambling factor, which this is all about. So she's a maid, and she cleans the rooms, and she talks at length about how disgusting the process is, and some things she finds smeared on televisions at times, and things that are left in the toilets, as in not flushing. I mean, there is some amusing factor from King, again, a little bit of dark comedy. But so there's always an envelope that is left in case you want to, tip the maid a little bit extra. Be kind in that particular regard, because they do not have the easiest, most sanitary jobs either. And so she goes and she rips open this envelope because it was sealed. So she assumed that there's got to be something in there. There's only a single quarter. So she's just like, God damn it. And yet there's also a note that says, this is a lucky quarter. And so she's like, ooh, whoopity-doo, lucky quarter. And so she finishes up her day, and she has to go and, tend to her kids. And the fact that one of them needs braces and the other one needs to go get some serious, doctors looking at him because of some potential health issues. And she wishes she could get him a Sega Dreamcast. And so there's a fair share of some different things there in that regard. But she's like, what can I use this quarter for? Throw it in a slot machine or something. And it turns into a really sweet story. There is a little bit of a psych out to it. And I was just like, okay, I know what's going to happen after the psych out. It was in the psych out of a psych out. So without spoiling things, that's about as far as I can go with this one. It's short. It's sweet. I mean, it's maybe 20 pages long. So it's interesting. And I guess it shows the randomness of the fact that King did randomly choose all of these by shuffling cards. Yeah, it's obviously because this doesn't feel like it should be the final story. Yet it is. So there you have it, guys. What are your thoughts on that particular one? I did see a few other comments coming in. Jose Storm says, is the room 1408 supposed to be evil like in the Overlook, or just haunted? It's supposed to be something evil and elevated without spoiling things. I know they alter the mythology a little bit in the film, and I haven't watched the film in a few years, so I almost feel like throwing it on tonight, since I just listened to the short story that King reading it today, right before final preparation for this, and so it's really fresh, and I'm curious to double check. But yeah, there's a lot of similarities to the Overlook and to one room in particular. So they don't imply in the short that the whole hotel is haunted, though, but then again, in The Shining, it was like that was the most centralized level of evil, but yet there is evil throughout. There's an evil presence throughout the entirety. They don't imply that to be the case. If that kind of dances around trying to answer the question. Joe Esposito says, Jaime, forgive me, I'm late. What do you think of the It prequel series coming to HBO Max? I feel like only focusing on 1960 is a mistake. Do multiple seasons, start with the 1700s. Yeah, I did a whole video of speculation about it, and I can't say. I've been saying since the Castle Rock series debuted, when this show was in its infancy, that I was like, okay, Castle Rock, I feel like maybe it's been featured in more stories, as the setting. Derry is mentioned a lot. Like Derry's mentioned, and the guy in Road Virus Goes North. He lives in Derry, but I always felt like with all of those interludes, that Mike Hanlon puts together, that there's so much awesomeness that they could do. So apparently, from what I understand, not what they are doing. Although, so being set in 1960, from what I hear, they're going to kind of try to tell their own stories. I always wanted them to do one season of one interlude, one season of another interlude, almost like American Horror Story, where it's its own self-contained story, but there is interconnectivity amongst seasons at times. And so maybe a character who reoccurs or whatever. So that's what I wish they would do. I'm trying to remain cautiously optimistic, but yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Okay, I agree. Starting with the old stories reference with would be my choice. Yeah, because you could do the crazy lumberjack bit. You could do the insane, shootout with the mobsters and stuff. You could, I guess they explored the egg hunt a little bit in these new ones, but yeah, there's so much to properly do the black spot. I mean, yes, they're like expand on some stuff that you hinted at, and then also tell original stories to the people who have only seen 2017 and 2019. That's what I wish they would do, but from what I understand, they are doing their own original bit. But who knows? I mean, it's still in the planning stages. They are like just assembling a writer's room, from what I understand. This hasn't even been officially greenlit to go to series. So, okay, people really miss the point of it. The whole town has been corrupted by, over hundreds of years, to the point of the book is so not about an evil clown. A proper telling of Derry would have Pennywise be a recurring villain. Interesting. I read an article recently where this dude, who I don't even think had read the book It, was arguing that there's no point in telling a story set in Derry without a losers club. And that was their argument for it. And I'm like, have you read the book and read the interludes? And, that writer was suggesting that these would presumably follow a new set of kids. And I'm like, I don't think you need to, because pretty much there is so much other horror in Derry that is strictly from an adult standpoint of experience. So I don't think you need to have like Losers Club, like Zero or some crap like that. But who knows? Only time shall tell. But we've been going for nearly 90 minutes, everybody. I want to thank you so very much. A grande gracias, as I always say, for those who stuck around, or if you were watching this after the live broadcast, for Everything's Eventual, celebrating its 20th anniversary. And with the fact that we had to bump this as the book of the month up a month due to the channel issues that I had mentioned, and I'm looking for the book, I had to push all of the other books of the month up a month. And so our April book that we were supposed to be discussing today will actually be the one for next month. And that is none other than The Running Man, yes, which is celebrating, I believe, its 40th anniversary this year. And so I've got this dope copy of the Bachman books that I found recently at a thrift store. Rage is in this one, so that's going to be exciting. I don't think I've reread The Running Man since the original time that I read it, which is very, very exciting. I know everybody thinks of the Arnold movie, and that's some good cheesy 80s fun. I'm into it. But yeah, it's going to be. I know the book, from what I remember, is a lot darker, especially the ending. So if you have an inclination, at the beginning of June, we are going to be discussing for the May book of the month The Running Man, and maybe even a little bit of discussion, who knows, about the Arnold film. So once again, grande gracias, Jaime and Fuego. You can find more on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on the YouTubies, obviously. And that's where the liking, the sharing, the subscribing, showing that love and support greatly appreciate it if you would like to become a patron and just let us know something you would like us to review, do a commentary on, all of that jazz. It is in the description box below. So I've been doing this little segue thing for the last few months, and it's going to be next week. I'm continuing my Barker at the Moon. Yeah, I've been doing this Clive Barker segment once a month. So yes, it has been taking away one of the Hail to Stephen King episodes, but I've been talking about it for like a year, and I started it. I am up to the 5th Book of Blood, so there's only 6 of them, so I am just about ready to round all of these out. The other 4 episodes covering the Books of Blood, they are all up here on the channel, so please, if you have any interest in the craziness of Clive, it's been a lot of fun just getting a different flavor for horror, because boy, is Barker so much more depraved and yet fascinating in that same regard. So, yeah, that's going to be the end of the proceedings, peeps. So thanks once again, and until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sen amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I am hoping we have been well met and we share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King. I know they released all the Bachman books like separately under their like Stephen King writing is Richard Bachman. So that's your best bet to find them. And the audiobooks are out and about as well. So right on. Lou, thanks so very much, man. Once again, happiest birthday. Belated, obviously. And Sharon, yes, absolutely. Thanks so very much for stopping in, everybody. Adios. Shooty hoops time.